Hello again. Well, Nordmende, interesting brand. Started off just being called Mende in the 1920s. A German company started off in Dresden as a radio manufacturer, and then following World War II, the son of the founder relaunched the company from new headquarters in Bremen, which is in North Germany, hence the Nordmende. Originally it was called Norddeutschland Mende Rundfunk or something like that, but it eventually got shortened to Nordmende. Not a particularly well-known brand in the UK, but they did sell stuff over here for a while. Now, in an early video when we were talking about fixing my record player, I mentioned that I worked for a company that used to import the dual brand, but one of the other brands they imported was Nordmende, and I don't think they produced much other than TVs at that time, or that we sold anything other than TVs, but there was always a little pile of Nordmende sets waiting to be fixed, or no Mendes as I callously called them to the people who worked on them, overlooking the fact I wasn't being particularly speedy in repairing the pro audio stuff that was assigned to me at the time. By the mid-1970s, the company had been sold to the French Thomson Group, but this is a product of the original firm from before that takeover happened. In their time, they produced some very interesting products. I have to just point out this one. The Spectra Colour Studio. And look at this. It's a TV with 4 screens. So it's got one big screen and 3 little ones. So you can watch 4 programmes at the same time. That would have tested, I think, the attention span of the modern smartphone generation. Nowadays in mainland Europe, they still make DAB radios. And I think they sell those in Ireland as well. But there's a company in Ireland that owns the brand name. The brand name seems to have been distributed around various other companies that are not necessarily connected. And you can, in the UK, buy white goods from Nordmende still. Yeah, they don't have to be white to be called white goods. It's just a phrase. This clearly is not white goods. This is black and silver goods. A radio called the Carrera, I think, like the Porsche, but without the pulling power, in either sense of the term. Set comes from the late 1960s, I believe. It's got 4 wave bands. It's all labelled up in German, as you can see. And in fact, this example, I don't know whether these are ever sold in this country. And looking at the back of it, so let's get that the right way up, you can see it's got the name of, I believe these will be the supplier, which is shown as located in a place called Winterthur, which is in Switzerland. Other clue here, of course, is that you can see the Swiss flag and PTT and radio on it. So I assume this is some sort of licensing stamp or approval stamp that the Swiss radio telecommunications authorities had to issue in case somebody got a transistor radio that might not have been built properly and might bring about the downfall of the country. It actually feels pretty solid. It clearly needs a bit of a clean-up. Oddly enough, for something which is German in origin, it only goes up to 104 on FM. That's more of an English disease, really. In Germany, most German sets I've seen do go up all the way to 108, which limits its usefulness over here in the modern world. There's a bit of damage to the plastic case around both sides of it, but otherwise it's reasonably intact. The only other thing is this aerial is, I don't think it's intended to be a detachable telescopic aerial, but this has become a new feature of the thing over the years, but I'm sure we can do something about that. So removing this thing here, we find it will take 4 1.5 volt batteries. It can also be supplied by a 6 volt power supply, 6 volt DC power supply here. There's obviously a little earphone socket as well and a DIN socket for input and output. Let's get some batteries in it and see how it goes. Alright, here we go. Very noisy on the bottom of the pot there. So what are we on at the moment? We're on FM.
Well, then in my case, I can only say to that, I rest my case. We're never going to agree because the man's a total nutter.
Well, that could describe half of Cambridge, really, couldn't it? So the FM works, certainly. Let's just see, have a look at the others. Don't think we'll get much on shortwave. I mean, you can hear it hitting something, so shortwave clearly works. Don't think you're going to get much at this time of the day here.
At all to what they back in the 1980s. Factor of heaven knows how much they've risen by. So who sets the sale price?
After that, well, man. White and Jordan on TalkSport with Selco Builders Warehouse. Order online for free.
Yeah, medium wave works. Just leaves us radio for long wave, I suppose, if we can find that.
Well, that's a sort of interesting insight as to how complex some of these relations are, that you just think groups should show.
So, yeah, it doesn't seem there's a lot wrong with it. Probably just a clean-up, really. We'll get the thing apart and see if we can get at the pots. Well, so taking the batteries out and the cover off. Looks pretty obvious to me. There are 3 screws here. They haven't done much to disguise the fixings on this radio. There's a lot of, you know, screws. Well, that doesn't show very well, does it? Screws protruding like that rather than covered up. But I suppose that should at least make it easy to dismantle. We can always hope. So let's get those out. So looking at the thing, it looks like it's got a split in the middle, so I'm hoping that, yeah, well, that bit is pulling out. This bit not so much. I missed something? I don't think so. Yeah, I think if somebody's had this apart before, I know how this damage to the corners has occurred, because it doesn't come apart very obviously, but yeah, there it is. That's the thing in bits. It's the battery component there. Speaker, which looks, I can't see how big it is, it doesn't look particularly small, in the middle. Looks quite nice construction, really. I mean, you think back to those old Bush sets of the early 60s that we've looked at recently. This is like another age, isn't it, even though it's only a few years newer. Saying that, you know, I think there were other British sets that were also somewhat more advanced than the Bush ones were. I've got the circuit diagram for it. It's largely silicon transistors apart from the output amplifier that drives the speakers. These are germanium transistors. That's quite common at the time, the germanium transistors to be used. They're both PMPs. They don't need complementary pair because it's got transformer driven audio output. All the rest of the transistors are silicon and they're painted bright orange. Look at that, every transistor is orange. Now, I'm not one of those that says every component should be replaced with something that looks like the component that would have been there originally, but I'd be interested if I did have to replace, and it doesn't sound like we will, but if I did have to replace a transistor in this, I'd be tempted to paint it orange just to keep the look. Because I don't think I've ever seen orange transistors before. All of these are Hitachi transistors, so they're 2SCs for the silicon ones and 2SBs for the germanium output ones. The noise on the pot could be that the pot is just dirty, or it could be that it's DC offset of some sort, so maybe we might need to replace some of the electrolytics around the audio stage. I think it's a little bit out on positioning on the dial on VHF, so perhaps we might need to tweak that a bit, but I think the next stage is to get the thing apart. Now I can see that this comes straight out here now. That's interesting, because that whole this thing is supposed to be screwed in. In fact, I can see the end of the screw here. Ouch. It's got a very sharp piece of solder on it, and it doesn't quite go onto the bottom of that, so that's another thing that's not that's not quite right. Let's put those in there. So how do we get it apart further? I imagine take off these 2 knobs off the front, and they're going to come off without too much persuasion. Feels like it. Those will go through the thing. There's 2 screws there, but I don't Do I need to take those off? I think I do, so let's take those 2 screws off the front as well. The reason I'm doing this is I can't actually see this volume pot here. I can't see it without pulling the whole thing out. It's all covered up by that board, so I need to get to that anyway. So I'm going to have to get that board out. There seem to be screws there holding it in, but I think we're going to have to take the front off first. Maybe not. Let's just try taking those screws out. Right, the answer seems to remove the entire tuning scale and front panel as well, which to be fair I was going to have to do because they need cleaning up, so it doesn't make things too bad. And now it looks like this might actually allow me to pull that board out, although the wires there are very tight. There's not a lot of clearance. Let's see what we can do. So I can at least see those pots now, and I'll try giving it a clean up and see if that improves the noise. And while I'm here, I'll just clean up some of these switches as well. Rather complicated tuning chords, so I don't want to mess that up and have to do all that because it looks quite messy. I have got the diagram for it. It is in the manual. But yeah, let's see if a bit of squirty stuff in the switch helps matters.
From the Labour Party following the incident. Donald Trump is preparing to choose a...
That does seem to have worked, actually. It just did need a clean, so not much else needed on that. I thought we might have to start looking for DC, so I'm not going to replace any capacitors on that basis.
The UK will be affected.
I'll give these switches a clean as well. So that's all back together and cleaned up. I've given the aerial a bit of assistance by putting a wire into it for the moment, because reception's not usually brilliant round here. And as you can hear, we now have some stuff on shortwave, so shortwave does work, even if it's quite faint, but at least now that we're in the evening, we've got some shortwave stuff.
First touch has to be perfect. It doesn't quite suit his game. Whereas if he was playing as, let's say, Joe Ward's replacement, and you've got Jonathan Clark-Harris in the middle,
I do find this tone control, this top cut, is as usual quite severe.
Better player, or at least it would suit him better. And ultimately, that's what's happened.
Might almost be worth reducing that capacitor a little bit, so that's not quite as big, because it can sound a little bit harsh on some highly compressed sort of pop radio, which I'm not going to play you because we just get copyright notices and things like that. But it all seems to be working. It's cleaned up nicely. I mentioned a little caption earlier about the ferrite rod being broken, which I only noticed looking at the video later when I was editing it, so I probably do need to get that apart and glue it. But it's not actually affecting reception. I mean,
It'll be a good night, I think.
Yeah, I heard an interview earlier today, and the expert from Greece said PAOK are the noisiest bands in the world.
Well, we've got a treat then tonight. There's also a net that's been put up in front of them. We expect possibly flares happening, but...
Yeah, overall, nice sturdy little set. Didn't require a lot of work. Quite rare, I think. I don't think I've ever seen another one of these things. There was a later version. There was a Nordmende Carrera Deluxe, and the only difference from that, as far as I can see, has exactly the same RF and audio circuitry. The only difference was that it had a wood grain finish and also had a built-in mains transformer. But I think if you see either of these, then they're certainly worth rescuing. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. See you on the next one.